got the cue. We're on time. We can go. I want to thank you all for being here. For those of you who enjoyed the meal together, you may have noticed that it was just a couple of people this time. We had a couple people out due to illness. And so really thankful to Ann and Nancy in particular for, again, pulling off the meal, and to all of you for the wonderful conversation. And I didn't get around to all the tables, but enjoyed visiting in before the meal and also as we were eating. So my role as minister is just to say, we're here, the Unitarian Universalists of Transylvania County, doing something good again. And I thank you if you are unfamiliar with us for coming and finding this program. If you are fully familiar with us, one of our pledging members, this is great too. You'll see what we have to offer on these wonderful Wednesdays. For those of you who did not come to the meal, if you really love this presentation and want to donate a little bit here or there to the good of this congregation and what we do, we always appreciate that too. I'm going to turn it over now to the person who really was the instigator of this evening. And so Paula, would you come forward and do the introductions? Thank you.
Yes, I've been known as an instigator in many ways, in many places. Anyway, my name is Paula Hartman-Stein. I'm new to the Brevard area. Came here in November with my husband, Rob, and we're exploring churches. And I attended some meetings of the ARE, Adult Religious Exploration Committee. And when we were brainstorming topics, I said, well, I have an idea. And I often have ideas. Some work, some don't. We know this one's going to work. Anyway, so I came up with the idea of Dr. David Chastain, who is a new adjunct professor at Brevard College. And he taught last semester, and I'll be teaching this coming semester alongside him due to Allison O'Leary, who's one of the guests in the audience, who's the coordinator of the psychology program there. And our program today we thought would be of interest to you because it hits many of our lives. Certainly grief hits all of our lives at some point. And he'll be talking about the intersection of addiction with grief and when they can combine. So I'm interested to hear how he does that. Dr. Chastain has a PhD in counseling, a master's in addiction studies. He holds the clinical substance abuse counselor credential from Wisconsin, so he's also from another area. He's given numerous presentations on the pathways of recovery, as well as presentations on grief for many different conferences. And he'll be teaching 3 courses at Brevard, and one of them he has newly created, which is on grief and dying. So with that, Dr. David Chastain.
Thank you. There is so much to say about addiction and about grief and about how they join together. When I'm finished, I know it's weird to go to the end at the beginning, but when I'm finished, I want to tell you about some handouts that you might want to have that are going to add to what I'm going to talk about this evening. I've got some cards here with my email on there, so I'll remind you about that at the end as well. I've worked in the field for a very long time, both as an addiction counselor, as a program manager, and as a faculty member of a number of different colleges. And I have my own experience in active addiction, which ended thankfully in 1980. So I've been sober a lot longer than I used, thank God. But all throughout my life, all throughout my career, I have seen a consistent linkage between grief and active addiction. And it shows up in a lot of different ways. One of the ways is that it can get in the way of somebody's willingness or even ability to get sober at the beginning. If I'm racked up in grief, and I'll certainly say more about this in a minute, I want to protect myself against that pain, and if use allows me to do that, that's where I'm going to stay. The other place that I've seen that connection happen frequently is when someone loses a person that they're really close to. Use can then be this calming force that, again, takes the person away from their pain. You're going to hear a little bit in the talk about my own experiences in both of those areas. My use kept me from dealing with losses in my early life. Later on, the fact that I wasn't using anymore allowed me to grieve and to move through the worst of that pain without going back to use again. So this title, When the Frying Pan Hits the Fire, it's something that my dad used to, that phrase, he used to use that phrase a lot when talking about how you start off doing something and it gets bad, and then you try and fix it and it gets worse. So you're falling out of the frying pan right into the fire. And I think it fits here when we think about what can happen when somebody falls either into addiction to try and stay out of the grief, which we can't really do, or again, the flip side. So here we go. Most of us, we get to see that again, that's lovely. Most of us will find ourselves in this place at some point in our lives. You think that's true? We work very hard to maintain balance, and we push and pull against all kinds of forces in our lives to try and correct this when it happens, and some would argue that we're more likely to stay there than anywhere else during the course of our difficult lives. What I mean up here, how we think can influence how we feel. If I get up in the morning, if we get up in the morning and we feel good and we feel strong and we're thinking about positive things that we're going to be doing that day, that's maybe going to generate some more positive feelings, which then may push us to do things that allow us to express those positive feelings, which will then go back and reinforce those good thoughts we had in the beginning. True? And that can certainly work the other way around too. And I've got an example here I'll get to in just a second here. But sometimes we can feel that anything may be better than that negative place that we're in, no matter what it is. I will say to you, this was true for me, and I think it's been true for a lot of other people too. Back in the active so-called research part of my early addiction life, if I was miserable and I used whatever it was I used, I didn't have to go from feeling miserable to feeling ecstatic. If I could get from miserable to apathetic, that was enough. And I think that's an important way to think about it. It didn't take me out, but it did make a little bit of a difference. So again, moving from a bad situation into something worse, hardly ever our intention. But in this case, addiction can keep us stuck in the grief. Grief can keep us stuck in the addiction. Does that make sense, I hope? If I believe I can't face or experience the pain of the grief, and I'm going to guess that someone other than me has had a grief experience where you've got that sense that there must be something that I can do so I don't have to experience those feelings. True? Okay. If my active use helps me avoid those feelings, I'm more likely to stay in that pattern. I may then not be able to imagine what life would be without the use, because what that means is if I set all of that coping stuff aside, I fall into the pain. And who wants to do that? So the longer a person stays in fear, and obviously that's what use does, is it keeps us stuck in that place, relying on it to cope, the stronger the fear becomes. The very thing that we don't want is exactly what happens. We don't like being in fear, but the use keeps us stuck there, and the fear grows, and then we need more use, right? And it just escalates. So the slide a little bit before that had thoughts and feelings and behaviors. Pardon me. I made a new one that includes beliefs in there. What we believe about our lives, what we believe about ourselves, what we believe about the people that we connect with and the people that we avoid is also very much a part of this cycle of how we kind of move through our lives. Pardon me. Oops. You know, there's a danger in whiskers. I always complain that there are very few coffee shops, and I'm a very avid coffee consumer, that have mustache cups. Very valuable things to have, but so I'm going to probably dribble on the table up here. Here's an example, and again, like we're saying here, all of these things are connected. How I think affects how I feel affects how I behave, and again, belief comes into that too. So here's this example. I'm stuck thinking about how boring my life is. As a result of those thoughts, that takes me toward feeling sad, feeling lonely, feeling discouraged. My belief then is that however I think of some higher power, whether it's God or the universe or whatever it is, my belief is that that force, that being, that strength has somehow abandoned me. And there I am, stuck in those feelings. However, I find solace, I find some relief, whether it's drinking or some other substance. And then being in that state of being drunk inhibits me from reaching out to connect to other people. The behavior that I demonstrate when I'm under the influence causes people to want to avoid me, and I don't take any action to improve my life. One of the things we always have to remember about people when they're stuck in a cycle of addiction is that not only is their behavior impaired, but our ability to perceive our lives accurately is also impaired. So our judgment isn't clear, it's foggy, it's cloudy. So then I go back to thinking more about how boring my life is. My belief that God or the universe has abandoned me is confirmed. And so that cycle then is maintained. And oftentimes, again, because of the impairment, I don't see this. I did not see this at all during that active part of my life. It's very, very difficult to be objective about yourself, even on a good day, true? I've been a teacher, a counselor, a therapist, a public speaker. I was even an actor earlier in my life. And I rely very, very much on my ability to use my voice. It's important to me to be able to speak loudly and clearly. It's important to me to know and to rely on the fact that I can soften my voice. But I need feedback from other people to tell me how I'm coming across. Did you ever hear your own voice recorded? When I hear a recording of my voice, this is what it sounds like. It's horrible. It's like Jerry Lewis. At any rate, point being, it's really hard to be objective about ourselves. And when we are under the pressure, whether it's pressure that comes from loss of ability to perceive ourselves accurately in addiction, or it's the pressure of the pain that comes with grief, it's very, very difficult to see something like this clearly. This is another cycle that looks at how people can get stuck in addiction. I just want to add a couple of points to this as well. So, everything that you and I do, including the fact that we're all in the room right now, everything is because of something we want or need or both. Now, I want to do this all the time. This is one of my favorite things to do. It's why I'm so happy being a teacher, because I really enjoy doing this. I really enjoy conference presentations. It's a borderline need, I think, because it makes me feel good, right? Make sense? Some of the things that we do, we only do because we need to, not because we want to. When I had cats in my house, I needed to empty the litter box regularly. I did not want to, but I did. Right? So everything that we do then is to get at something we want or need, and everything we do results in a payoff. Something happens. If it's positive, if we like it, we're going to do more of it. Simple enough, right? If it's not, we'll either tolerate it until something else comes along, or we'll just stop immediately and say, nope, not worth it, I'm not doing it again. There is a line that we cross here, hopefully this is going to work, between how much we do that additional behavior over and over again and the idea of loss of control. Loss of control means I can't predict when, how much, how often, or why I'm going to use. And again, I don't have the ability in the grips of this cycle to even see that clearly. Other people can see it clearly all the time, but the person who's stuck in there really can't. Unmanageability basically means you're being surrounded by problems that are increasing, but the problem has to do with this idea of change thinking, and I kind of alluded to that earlier. I don't want to change, so that's a difference in how I think about what's been happening to me. Sometimes people believe they can't and they're just stuck there anyway. Sometimes people don't think they have a problem. In my experience, with the experience of people that I've worked with and known, there is always someone who's experienced worse consequences than me. And so that person fulfills that definition of addiction. I don't, they do. I could have 99 out of 100 similar consequences, but for that one I didn't have, well, I don't have a problem. And then the bottom one has to do with euphoric recall, which basically means I only remember the good stuff. Now, the connection between this and the grieving process is that the good stuff is the relief that I experience from not having to feel. One of the things I always tell my students about, and have told them for many, many years, is that the ability to identify, sort, and express feelings is a language that we learn. And some people don't learn that language. Counselors are notorious for asking people, oh, how do you feel? How do you feel? And oftentimes a person will say, I don't know, because they never learned the language. It'd be a very awkward concept then. At any rate, the connection here is with that idea of euphoric recall. I remember the good stuff. Okay, maybe when I use, bad things happen, but when I use, I don't have to feel bad. I don't have to feel anything, so off I go. And oftentimes, what's meant by this spiral, you may have heard references to people hitting rock bottom. It's not that the cycle goes this way, it's that the cycle really goes this way until you're down at the bottom. That's my dad right there. My dad was a high school drama teacher. This was taken at a party after a play ended. This is my favorite picture of him, mostly because of the expressions on the students as they look at him. He's actually dancing there, or you could call it that. I was very, very close to my dad when I was growing up. When I got to high school, I got involved in the drama department, and I was either on stage or backstage all the time, working with my dad day after day. It's kind of like what happens when kids have one of their parents as their coach. And because because he knew me so well, he could draw things out of me that other people couldn't, right? I got out of high school a semester early, and I had started experimenting with use when I was 14. But as soon as I got out of high school and I left the drama department and I left my dad's kind of comforting influence, my use skyrocketed. About 2.5 years later, my dad died at age 44 of lung cancer, cigarette-induced lung cancer. As my use escalated, it created a distance between myself and my dad that could never be corrected because he died too quickly. Sometimes when we lose somebody that is that profoundly close to us, we may be smacked in the face with this sense of, what if this is how I'm going to feel now for the rest of my life? That is an overwhelming burden. And that loss and that feeling escalated my use, just like I was talking about before. A year later, pardon me, my girlfriend was killed right in front of me. We were at a party. We stepped out on the back porch of this apartment building, and everybody was drunk, including me. She bent over to pick up her coat that she dropped, and when she lost her balance, back through a railing and fell to her death. I was this far away from her. Nancy was a very small person. If I'd gotten a hand on her shirt, I would have been able to keep her from falling. What do you think happened to my drug use then? Skyrocketed again. What do you think I did with the grief? Nothing. Nothing. It was 5 years later, before I even began the process of trying to understand and unfold all of that. Now, what I like about this image, even though it's a sad one, people would reach out to me, just like you see in the image there, trying to get me to engage in life, to engage in the world, but in a sense, my eyes were closed to all of that. What that also meant was closed to my own process inside. This is an image of what's called a Gordian Knot. The question is, if you were going to untie it, where would you start? The usual response is with shears. And what I like about this is that grief can look very much like that. You can see up there many, 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 many different feelings, and many of these are slightly contradictory to each other, but they can all be churning and working at the same time. A young child who's lost their parent will, let me put it a different way, a child who's lost a sibling, that's a better example, will see the family pull away from them even though they're still alive, because grief pulls us away oftentimes and pulls us inward. That child then sometimes may feel jealous of the person who's died and envious of the person who's died because they're still getting a lot of attention and I'm not. There are people who experience the loss of someone due to horrible illness who may feel a sense of relief that at least they're not suffering anymore, but may at the same time also feel very angry by the fact that that person is gone. This conglomeration and collection of very powerful feelings, again, can be the force that would push somebody either back into active use or comfortably in use, because it gives us a respite from having to try and understand all of that. Now, what do we do? How do we help? We have to be cautious. We want people to feel better, yeah? We want people to feel better as fast as possible, and so what do? Oftentimes we tell people that are grieving, or we tell people that are in the active part of their use what to think, what to do, how to feel, how to behave. And it may be coming from a good place because we care. But oftentimes what people need is simply to be heard. Many of you, including me, may have been told by an elder in your life at some point, you need a good talking to, right? But oftentimes what we need is we need a good listening to. We need a good listening to. These are different ways that people can find comfort, different ways that people can find connection, can find relief, can find healing. But they're not the same for everybody, are they? My mother, for example, was raised in the Episcopal Church, which is over on the right there for the most part. And my mother loved all of that structure. When Dad died, she leaned very heavily on the structure of her church, and it served her well. It didn't serve me well at all. Unfortunately, nothing served me well except another big joint, another line, another pill, and another drink for a long period of time. Pardon me. Simply to find out from that person what are some things that they might want to do that would be healing is a lot more valuable than us telling them, well, I think you should do this or this or this or this or this. Right? So I've got two lists here. This is the first one, and I just want to go through these and explain why we might say that these are the worst things. At least she lived a long life. People told me this about my mom, who died of Alzheimer's some years ago. This is a true statement, yes? But it may not be helpful to hear. He's in a better place. My second wife died at age 33 of breast cancer. And people told me this all the time, well, at least she's in a better place. And my immediate response was, the hell she's in a better place. Her better place would be here with me. I know the intention, but the language was hurtful to me. It was not helpful. She brought this on herself. Wow. That's a frequent comment levied against cigarette smokers, for example, or people who drink or use drugs. They did it to themselves. There's a reason for everything. Well, when do I get to know what that reason is? I was in a grief group once, and there was a woman whose father had died 2 years earlier, and her husband kept saying, well, 2 years is a long time. You should be done. What had happened to her was that she didn't have anybody in her life until that point who knew how to help her grieve, including her husband. So she pulled it all inside and got stuck there. We have another child still, which is kind of like saying the child you lost doesn't really matter. What matters is the future. Right? She was such a good person, God wanted her to be with him. Kind of implies God's kind of selfish. It's a weird thing to make sense of. I know how you feel. You never know how someone else feels. All the counseling courses that I've taught and the supervision that I've done of new counselors, they always want to say, I know exactly how you feel. You can't ever know that. You could say, I know what it feels like to lose someone you love. You could say that. That's accurate. But to say, I know how you feel, most of the time that first response is going to be, no, you don't, because you can't. It's all so different. She did what she came here to do, and it was her time to go. How do you know that? Right? And be strong. Be strong is oftentimes what boys and men have been told to do for years. Father dies, people say you have to be strong for your mother, and you have to be strong for your younger siblings. What about my grief? Can't I just be weak and pained in my own grief for a period of time? No, you got to be strong. You got to be strong. Just quit using. Just say no. Just say later. Just cheer up. Right? People say it's hard to quit drinking. Whoops. There we go. They're wrong. It's easy. I've done it 1,000 times. Every night when I go to bed, I quit. Wake up in the morning, that's a different day. When you suffer from depression, somebody tells you to just cheer up. Oh, what an idea. Why didn't I think of that? Genius. It's not that simple. It's not that simple. There are two, I'll be talking about these in the course coming up, starting tomorrow. The tasks of grief and the stages of grief. When Elizabeth Kubler-Ross developed her stages, depression, anger, bargaining, denial, acceptance, she developed those stages related to people who were facing their own death. It's not the same, is it, as it is when you lose somebody that you really love and care about. But when she did that, and we had this formula now, the clinical world sort of grabbed onto, oh, now we know what's supposed to happen, right? Without realizing that it was intended for a different audience. The tasks of grief, and I'll show you what these mean in a second. So here are the stages. Denial. Certainly people that are active in their use may be denying all kinds of things and may be stuck in that place. If you think about this in relationship to somebody who's facing their own death, it makes sense then, doesn't it? Oh no, I'm not dying. What do you mean? I'm not going to die. I'm perfectly okay. I'm not as bad as so-and-so. The anger, why me? Why is this happening to me? Compromise, the bargaining part. Depression, starting to kind of come to terms with the end of it, and then acceptance, being able to move on, which means to let go of life. Now the tasks, and this is one way that they're described in terms of the acronym TIER. Tasks suggests things that you can work on and that you can make progress toward. Stages doesn't really do that. Task is something that you can attach some goals to, right? To accept the reality of the loss. Children have a very hard time with the permanence of death. I have a great example of this. We had a dog when my son was a little boy, and the dog got sick and died, and we buried the dog on the property, and puts the earth over the dog, and we're walking up to the house. We get about halfway there, and Michael says, okay, can we go dig her up now? Because in his mind, his little boy mind, that's all she needed. But no, we can't dig her up now. Experience the pain of the loss. Now, obviously, if somebody's using all the time, they're not going to be able to take on that task very well at all. Little moments here and there, right? To adjust to the new environment without the lost person. One of the big challenges in this, and the tasks go into a lot more detail about this, is the idea of finding a way to maintain a relationship with that person who's died, even though they're no longer there physically. How do we do that? For people who have a tenuous grip on their own spirituality, that may be a very difficult thing to do. But it's important and it's incredibly valuable. My dad lives in here. Colleen lives in here. My dog Sucha lives in here. I came up with this great word about your dog or your cat. You all have a dog or a cat, at least at some point in your life, that you really loved. The word is furson. Right? That's not your person, that's your furson. They live there too. And then to reinvest in the new reality. The new reality that means I can't pick up the phone and call my mom and talk to her about UUTC. I can tell her in my heart, I suppose I could pick up the phone. Actually, they don't really look like that anymore, do they? Oops. All right. So we have to consider then also not only the challenge for the person, but that idea of what sort of resources does that person have around them. Like the woman I told you about whose husband said, it's been 2 years, you should be done. And she just didn't have resources. Very simple offer of support really goes such a long way. And then here's the 10 best things to say. I'm so sorry for your loss. Now, there's a theme running through these. I wish I had the right words, just know I care. Are there really any right words? I don't think so, other than I'm sorry for your loss. I don't know how you feel, but I'm here to help in any way I can. Here to help. I'm here to do what I can. Oftentimes, when we lose somebody, it's hard to say their name out loud. And it's really important when you're offering support to somebody that you say that name out loud. You and Colleen will be in my thoughts and prayers. Think about the difference between saying you and Colleen are in my thoughts and prayers versus you and the deceased. It's cold, yeah? Okay. Same thing here. My favorite memory of Colleen is this. Saying the name out loud helps the person continue to exist, really, yeah? I'm always just a phone call away. I'm available. Just give the person a hug. Oftentimes, I would suggest to that you ask them first. It looks to me like you could use a hug. Can I give you a hug? And they may say no. And if they do, we have to respect that and say, okay. But they might welcome it too. We all need help at times like this. I'm here for you. You see here the availability that you're offering. You see here that you're not telling the person what to do, are you? You're providing yourself to be available. I'm usually up early or late if you need anything. Oftentimes, again, whether it's somebody in the grips of grief or somebody early on in their recovery from addiction, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, very difficult. Very difficult. You wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and you're sober for 15 minutes. The next thing you want to do is get to an all-night bar or an all-night liquor store. But if you know that there's somebody that you can call who's not going to be upset with you for calling them, what a difference. Same thing's true if that grief surges up. We don't have to say anything. We can just simply be there. Pardon me. This is a little bit complex. Notice the shaking of the head here. What's happening? But what's meant by this is that in a given day, we can be invested in whether it's the notion of I'm really committed to abstinence and I'm connecting with people, or I'm really allowing myself to feel the pain of my loss and I'm communicating with people about that. And later in the day, I'm isolating, I'm avoiding, right? So this idea that it's not a sequential, right, vertical process. It's back and forth, and that's okay. That's okay. There's disenfranchised grief is grief that other people don't recognize as valid for you to have. People, for example, who have never had a dog or a cat, and you lose your lovely pet, may say, what's the deal? It's only a dog, because they don't have that perspective, right? So it's disenfranchised. The challenges, the sense of loss, people who are early in either wanting to quit or have already quit still know that use provided them comfort. They still know that there was a lot of camaraderie at the bar. There may have been craziness, for sure. There may have been fights. There may have been memory loss. But there was also camaraderie, and we crave that. Using friends are hard to let go of. Even though intellectually we may know these people are dangerous for me, emotionally, but they're my friends. If I don't hang out with them, who do I spend my time with? No one. Right? So active social life winds up being no social life. I had a patient once who say, he came into group and he was looking really sad, and people were asking him what was going on. He said, I realized I can't go out to eat anymore. This man had no conception of the idea that there could be restaurants that didn't serve alcohol. He didn't know that at all. And so when they, you can go here, you can go here, it's like life suddenly became worth living. I can go out to eat. What I mean by easy money is the other effect of active addiction in terms of dealing. And this is a true example. I worked with a guy in treatment who was 35 when he came in, although you'd never think he was that old. He had become very wealthy through the process of dealing. He could go anywhere, do anything, buy anything, but he had stopped going to school past 7th grade. His family was a dealing family in the depths of Chicago, and his parents thought that it was okay for him to drop out of school because he had really good eyes on the street, and he could help the family that way. So he got into all kinds of trouble, legally, socially, and also was afraid of the consequences physically of his use. But now, what is he going to do at 35 years old? How is he going to find a job? How is he going to connect to anybody? He had no fears about returning to use. He had fears about living. All right, let me just... Okay, and then another example of this notion of disenfranchised grief. This is a bold statement to say, and it could include other kinds of relationships, but if I was in a relationship with someone who took advantage of me, who beat me, who lied to me, and then that person died, am I allowed to feel sad that they've died? And some would say no. How can you possibly feel bad? That scoundrel, that jerk is finally out of your life. And that person then is stuck. Where do they get the support? Where do they get the process of trying to heal their own pain, even though it's included with a lot of other issues as well? All right. Now, I included this in here just because it kind of gives some ideas about how people define the process of recovery. This is a big study. There are 9,000 people in here. And all of the elements in here, none of them have to do with a method. These are more kind of the results, feeling honest, being honest with myself, which is sometimes incredibly difficult. Being able to enjoy life without use, like they used to do, right? Living a life that makes a contribution. When I was active in my process, I wasn't contributing to anything except maybe the economy at fast food restaurants. It was about the extent of it. Being the kind of person that people can count on. I love the question, what kind of ancestor do you want to be? Isn't that a good question? Giving back. and being consistent with what I believe and what I value. So again, you see that it doesn't have anything to do with the method. It just has to do with the process. So we will believe that we understand a lot about a person. We will come to conclusions about why they do what they do. But we always have to, no, come on, there we go, whoops. We have to be gentle with people because their entire life we don't know. We just know a little bit. All right. Hopefully, we can find that point of balance. Sometimes we find that point of balance in a given day, and then tomorrow it doesn't feel that way, and then 3 weeks from Tuesday it does again. And maybe there's a good week and a good month, and then not so much the case. But I think what we have to hang on to is the fact that that exists, and that we can continue to work in that direction, whether it's moving into and through and past the horrible pain of grief, or moving into and going forward in an abstinence lifestyle. So these are some resources that I would encourage you to look at. There are all kinds, an open meeting, whether it's AA, NA, Al-Anon for family members, or self-management and recovery training, means you don't have to label yourself. You can just go and learn. I have a number of my cards up here with my email address on here. If you want to take one of these, there are a number of handouts that I can then send to you in the email reply, okay? So you can certainly do that. There are 2 books that I would strongly recommend, but I am not giving them away. This is not a contest. Gabor Mate is a brilliant, brilliant clinician and writer, and this is about his experience working with primarily IV heroin users in a clinic in Vancouver. He says he stopped asking people to tell him about their use and to tell him instead, answer the question, what happened to you? Excellent, excellent book. And this is a very easy and quick sort of a guidebook to understanding grief. 10 Essential Touchstones. It's really a good one. And then the handouts are, some of them are just individual slides that I pulled off of the PowerPoint. So if you want any of those, please let me know. Also, there was a slide in here that we took off that has a really, really nice little video. Remember that if you want me to send you the video. It's animated, and it's about how we can't push somebody into feeling better, but we can be with them while they're in pain. It's an excellent little video, but I can send you the link to that as well. So, that's what I have. And if you have questions, I would certainly welcome them. And we have a couple of microphones up here. Otherwise, there you go.
I'll let you open up a counseling session with a common starting, instead of the bullets that you gave, like so an acquaintance might do, but as a professional, you might say, what's going on, Bob?
Mm-hmm.
Is that accurate?
Sure, you might say, tell me what's important to you, tell me why you're here today, what is it that you want to get from this experience? How can I help? Are there things that you maybe want to understand better about yourself or about whatever? It's a good question.
I have 2 questions, David. My brother lost his 44-year-old son, and he was quite distraught and thought that he should have been the one who died. And I heard my brother muttering to himself, and I just wanted to get your reaction. Is this, do you think, for some people anyway, a good thing to say that my brother kept saying over and over, it's God's will?
Well, obviously I don't know your brother, but certainly it's true that if people are in the grips of that horrible pain And if they believe then that it was God's decision to take that person, there can be a relief in that notion. That's the purpose that sometimes people are just miserable to find. When my girlfriend was killed, there could be no valid understanding of that at all. When my dad died, eventually it was clear to me that his body couldn't contain his spirit anymore because of the ravages of cancer. But when people say that it was God's will, I might ask them, tell me about how you know that. Tell me about this God that you believe in that would want to take your son. Tell me about that God.
My other question had to do with, you're talking mostly about grief because of a loss or a death.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think these same ideas, stages, what have you, also refer to grief over, divorce that you didn't want?
Absolutely true. And this is material that we'll be talking about in the class starting tomorrow. But the fact that loss goes way beyond death. There's so many things that even something simple like loss of an opportunity, or you have a dream about something you want to accomplish in your life and changes happen and you can't get there anymore and you're grieving that loss. My family moved when I was in 7th grade, going into 8th grade. Up and through 7th grade, I was a straight A student. In 8th grade, I got D's in the first marking period. And it's because I was feeling so abandoned and lost without those friends that I had. None of them died. And I was in a good school and we had a nice home. But that separation from those relationships was definitely a major loss. Good questions.
Kind of a similar question on the addiction side of things, like how far does this reach? Because you talked mostly about drugs and alcohol.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking about an addiction that a lot of us, maybe some of us in this room have, which is like addiction to our phones.
Mhm.
Sort of social media and things
Oh, yeah.
like that. Do you think that there are similarities?
Although I don't have it here, there's a very interesting slide where a person is holding their phone like this, and it looks as if the veins are coming out of their arm and going into the device. And I think what's happened is that we've seen where, especially younger people, are separated from not the phone, not the device, but social media. They're lost. There's this, so many acronyms for everything, but this FOMO, fear of missing out, right, can be powerful. Even the fact that people can be so immediately contacting. You're never going to hear a phone call. You wouldn't have heard this years ago where the first line is, "Where are you now?" Because I would call your house. I know where you are. You're in the kitchen. You're in the living room. You're in the bedroom. Where are you now? But that immediacy and that need to stay connected and that idea that if I'm not connected, something's going to happen that I'm not going to know of. And I think particularly I haven't seen studies about this, but my guess is that over the last 2 years, that's gotten even more significant. I'm very curious about how this new group of students coming in, are they going to look different than the group that we worked with in January? They might. The other, in addition to that, though, I didn't say anything about gambling, which is certainly another very powerful connection. In Matei's book, he writes about, I'm not going to tell you what it is, because you have to read it, but he writes about an addiction process that he recognizes in his own life that is not drinking, it's not drugs, it's not gambling. It's kind of unexpected, but the way he talks about it, it fits. It's a really elegant example. Is that?
Yeah. The only other thought I was having was like the disengagement, like getting away from something that's some grief that you're experiencing or stress that you're experiencing, but also just disengage and
Yeah, and it can be, ironically, I think that the superficiality of just scrolling through Facebook, you don't have to really connect with it at all, but it occupies your eyes and your mind. It doesn't ask anything of you. Television can be the same thing, and I suppose years ago, books. My family, this is a little bit off track, but bear with me. My family has a cottage over in Michigan that was built by our family in 1905. And in the process of going through a closet that what hasn't been used in years, I discovered about 60 novels in there, some of them going back to having been published in 1890 and earlier. And I was imagining my ancestors being so absorbed in those books, like my nieces and nephews are now in the screen. That distraction, as difficult as it can be, can also be very important too. Again, where's the balance?
Dr. Chastain? Yeah, I like your emphasis on balance throughout, sort of as a theme running throughout your talk tonight. Getting sober, that was my biggest thing. I had no real experience with living life on life's terms. I just didn't know who I was or whatever. And so I never could figure out what normal was. You know, you get a feeling, is that a normal feeling? I mean, am I supposed to be mad at this or am I, what's going on?
Yeah.
And I kept asking my sponsor over and over again at different times the whole first year about, is this normal? Is this normal? What's normal? And he finally said, it stuck with me, all these years. He said, well, Don, you ought to know what normal is by now because you pass it daily as you swing from extreme to extreme.
It's in there.
It's in there somewhere.
But the other thing that you're referring to is, can you trust yourself too? And that theme also plays out as people are trying to move into recovery. I don't trust my own judgment. I don't trust other people, right? I don't trust my thoughts. And the same thing can happen in terms of what grief can do. If I have suffered deeply with the loss of whether it was Colleen or Nancy, I don't want to reinvest because I don't want that loss to happen again. And so I don't trust, whether it's in me or the universe or wherever it is. There's that dynamic too. And we can't go around it. We can only go through it. And the way that we do that is by how we connect.
I liked your 10 things to say to people in grief, and the fact that the consistent theme was, I'm here for you. But another consistent theme in that list is, you call me when you feel the need. Whereas my experience of grief is that it's so paralyzing and so absorbing that it's not possible to reach out.
Yeah.
Particularly if, as you say, you can't stand another moment of hurt. We are at that moment afraid to be rejected by the person who said, "Oh yeah, call me anytime."
Yeah, yeah.
So I've always been very grateful to the people who A, made the call themselves, and B, just showed up. The
Yeah.
value of just being
Yeah.
there is priceless.
That's such an important point because especially at the beginning, and I'm sure some of you would identify with this too, when Colleen died, I was overwhelmed by people showing up all day, every day. My refrigerator was overflowing with casseroles and hot dishes, whatever you call them, because that's one thing you can do. Well, here, eat this, you'll feel better. And so people are just pouring on the food. But then, and during that time, when you're surrounded by all of that energy, it can feel really good. But then what happens is that stops, and people stop reaching out. And so to be that person who continues to either call or leave a message or send a little card that could say something like, I'm here, I'm available, or even call them up and say, this was true with my early time away from addiction too. Somebody would call up and say, I'm going to go for a walk in the park, do you want to go with me? Just to connect, and there doesn't have to be anything to it other than another connection with people. But yeah, that's an important point. It's a very good point. Yeah.
What creates the realization that you're in an addiction and you want to stop, or you want to change? For yourself, at some point, what are some of the triggers that said,
Well,
maybe I don't need to keep
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the big question. And the answer is going to be different from person to person. My answer was, I was married at the time, and the second miscarriage that happened fairly early in the marriage, I was really high when it happened, and I was useless. And we had to go to the emergency room, and the emergency room physician should never have anything to do with medicine at all. He was horrible, and I was still high when we got there, and I couldn't form a sentence. Even though in the back of my mind I realized that this is horrific, I need to defend her, I need to speak up, I need to do something, I just wasn't there. And that to me became that unacceptable moment. This is not the man I want to be, it's not the husband I want to be, it's not the father I want to be. And that cemented what had already started, which is often the case for people. You see consequences that you can't undo. And maybe your first thought is, oh man, I need a drink. Oh, well, that's going to lead to another consequence. But that sort of rock bottom point, it's like there's a period of time when you have blinders on and the consequences may be really close to you, but you're able to kind of walk around and not see them. But then eventually the consequences are like that. And you can barely see through them. What that's going to be for a given person, it's going to be different. The amount of time is going to be different. Their ability to connect with other people, it's so many parts to that. Yeah. Yes.
What's your opinion of using medication for, to counter, let's say, an opioid addiction? Many psychiatrists, et cetera, are into that business, and I don't know the name of the drug right now. They give that in order to counter the opioid addiction.
I think that opioids are so dangerous. Overdose can happen so quickly and so easily and without the person realizing it at all. Here's an example. If I drank too much, I would pass out or throw up or both, and I didn't like those things. If I used too much cocaine, I could feel my heart beating in here. If I got a hold of some powerful hallucinogen, I would be scared that it was never going to end. But when a person uses, whether it's fentanyl or heroin or morphine, whatever it is, what's going to happen that's going to be different because it's more or stronger is just that I'm going to nod out sooner than I did last time. That's not painful and it's not scary. That, to me, is one of the reasons why people overdose so easily, because there's no warning. So if we can find a way to intervene and keep that person alive, then there may be an opportunity for the recovery process to begin. And if that means a medication that's going to keep them alive long enough to engage in the full process of what recovery means, I'm all for it. Let me just say, I really appreciate your attentiveness. I know that these talks, I was told, generally don't go much over an hour, and it's already 7:30. And you don't seem like you're anxious to leave at all, which is very nice. Thank you. So let me remind you again, if you want one of these, it's got my email on it. These are the handouts, and if you send me an email, I can then send you whatever handouts you want, and I can send you the link to that little video. Fair enough? And if you want the PowerPoint slides, I can send you those too. Just need your reply. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.